writers, let's talk colons. I mean, the punctuation. We'll talk about some instances of when and how you may want to use the colon in creative writing, but first let's talk about some of the grammatical rules governing the usage of the colon. The colon may be the least popular piece of punctuation, which on some level makes sense, as what the colon does can frequently be done by other means or other punctuation, such as a semicolon, comma, conjunction, and especially that em dash. But at the same time, the colon has some unique properties and can serve several important functions within a sentence. The one you may be most familiar with is to introduce a list, but it can also be used to introduce quotations or join an independent clause with another very closely related clause or phrase. In this prescriptive context that we're discussing, what bears mentioning is that the sentence or clause that comes before the colon must be independent, meaning it is a full, coherent sentence. That's why one of my biggest grammatical pet peeves is when people write a sentence like this. The ingredients for the cake are flour, sugar, and eggs. The ingredients for the cake are is not an independent clause. You'd correct this by rewriting it as something like, the cake requires several ingredients, colon, flour, sugar, and eggs. Also, as a brief side note, the question of whether or not to capitalize the first word following the colon is purely a stylistic choice. What's important is that you're consistent in whatever it is that you decide to do. As a tool to join two clauses, the colon is useful, but only when really the two items being joined are very, very, very related and when you want to lend a great deal of emphasis to that second item. So for example, quote, he had only one goal for the trip, to survive. Here, what follows the colon elucidates what the goal is, and that colon lends a great deal of rhetorical weight to survive. These days, you'll often see writers substituting that kind of colon for the em dash, which is all well and good, but I do think that in this particular example, that colon works just really well as a means of providing emphasis. There are a few contexts in creative writing where the colon is uniquely suited, so let's take a look at a few. The first, and maybe my favorite, use for the colon is when what follows the colon is a direct result or a consequence of what precedes it. In this way, the colon sort of marks causality. For example, he said he had forgotten his wallet back in the hotel room. We were going to be late. Here, we don't even require a coordinating conjunction to join these two sentences because the colon implies causality. Also, while we could technically use a semicolon here or even an em dash, neither of those tools implies consequence in quite the same way. I also like it because in contrast to if we'd use, for instance, an em dash here, the colon here sort of implies that our narrator is accustomed to their friend's forgetfulness, such that they know already that they are going to be late as a result of this, and they're not terribly surprised about it, whereas that em dash would have marked this sort of interruption and surprise. Another fun use for the colon in creative writing that sometimes you'll see is when writers use the colon to introduce dialogue that is ongoing and has previously been summarized. So something that looks sort of like this. Quote, as the night wore on, he ranted and raved about aliens, colon. Sure, we may not see them, but they can see us. Here, that colon just sort of drops us in the middle of this person's ranting and raving. We understand that there's other dialogue being said, but this is all we're privy to, and the colon's doing that for us. Or you could be traditional about it and use that colon to introduce lists in your creative writing, like she had everything he desired in a partner, a savings account, 401k, and trust fund. So sound off in the comments if you're a colon defender or if you're a colon skeptic. And yes, I immediately regret that phrasing of colon defender.